Developments in the state of Minnesota indicate a deep fracture in United States domestic politics and public order. The immigration investigation, initiated under intense pressure from the Trump administration and progressively expanded in scope, quickly transformed into a massive social explosion across the state. In particular, the loss of life among some protesters during the investigation process pushed the already high tension beyond a critical threshold. The events were not limited solely to immigrant communities. Broad segments of the public also began to react to the process. Information from the field reveals that the harsh and aggressive interventions of immigration and customs enforcement agents completely altered the course of the protests. The demonstrations, which initially began peacefully, rapidly spiraled into violence as federal agents increased their use of force. Tear gas, rubber bullets, forced detentions, and door-to-door raids simultaneously triggered fear and anger among the public. From this point forward, the protests moved beyond the format of traditional mass action and turned into street clashes that are difficult to control. The emergence of footage showing protesters beginning to arm themselves in certain parts of Minnesota highlighted the dangerous dimension the situation has reached. In videos spreading on social media, moments where armed civilians attempted to chase immigration and customs enforcement agents through the streets, targeted federal vehicles, and forced agents to retreat drew significant attention. These images fueled a perception of state-citizen conflict on a scale not seen in the United States for a long time. Experts point out that the arming of protesters is not merely an ideological reaction, but also a consequence of the perception that state authority has lost its legitimacy. Specifically, Trump's harsh rhetoric and unconditional support for immigration and customs enforcement are perceived as a direct threat by many segments in Minnesota. While this perception fuels the anger on the streets, it causes the violence to become increasingly organized and determined. The continuation of Trump's radical stance on immigration also weakens hopes that the crisis will subside in the short term. The president's uncompromising discourse is interpreted as a sign that federal operations will continue and even be expanded. This situation further increases uncertainty on the streets of Minnesota, leading to an atmosphere similar to a state of emergency across the state. It is stated that trade has come to a standstill in some regions and local governments are struggling to maintain security. The picture on the ground leads to interpretations that control has effectively been lost in certain neighborhoods of Minnesota. The fact that security forces have had to withdraw from specific areas, that the streets fall entirely under the control of protesters at night, and that the public is acting with the reflex to provide their own security marks an extremely critical threshold for internal security balances in the United States. This situation creates a dangerous precedent not only for Minnesota, but also for other states experiencing similar tensions. Statements coming from the White House front, rather than calming the crisis, emphasize a show of force and deterrence. The federal administration's definition of the protests as disorder and insurrectionary movements further deepens the tension on the ground. The developments in Minnesota show that immigration policies in the United States are no longer just a domestic policy heading, but have transformed into a security crisis directly affecting social order and federal-state relations. Within this entire picture, the future of Minnesota's streets remains uncertain. The possibility of the protests spreading, the increasing risk of armed conflict, and the likelihood of federal forces turning toward even harsher interventions could drag the state into a prolonged environment of chaos. Analysts evaluate that what has occurred could be a new breaking point in United States history, and that Minnesota could become the starting point for a broader wave of internal tension across the country.